Rikers Island prison food. What NYC inmates actually eat behind bars revealed. Cold meals, hot motives. If you think you know what happens behind Rikers Island's walls, think again. Like, subscribe, and comment if you're ready to uncover New York's darkest secrets. Rain streaked the cracked windows of the Vernon Sea. Bain barge as dawn broke over the East River. Police boats idled under the pale gray sky. Inside the gates of Rikers Island, trucks unloaded metal carts of food, each tray covered in flimsy plastic wrap. To the public, it was just another morning at America's most infamous jail. But to Detective Lena Ortiz, who had been called in before sunrise, it was the opening scene of a crime she couldn't yet name. 2 nights earlier, a 28-year-old pretrial detainee named Malik Jefferson had collapsed in the main housing unit after a dinner of lukewarm beans and grayish meatloaf. Other inmates swore they'd seen roaches scuttling out of the trays. The Department of Correction reported a medical emergency. Malik's public defender called it criminal neglect. Ortiz arrived to find the kitchen sealed off like a crime scene. Fluorescent lights flickering, industrial ovens still warm, crates of bread stamped with expiration dates weeks past. The deeper she walked, the stranger it became. A kitchen supervisor whispered that the contractor had switched suppliers to cut costs. A corrections captain admitted off the record that a freezer had failed for 3 days, but the meat was re-chilled and served anyway. In a back office, Ortiz found a stack of grievances filed by inmates, many alleging foodborne illness, some alleging retaliation for complaints. Each document was marked pending in the same red ink. Outside, reporters were already circling, sensing a scandal. But no one yet knew about the hidden ledger Ortiz had just uncovered, a thin black notebook taped under a prep table, listing deliveries, payoffs, and cryptic initials. Some entries read K, kosher short, and H expired okay. Others simply said green light. It wasn't evidence of a single tainted meal. It hinted at an entire scheme. As the sun climbed over the city skyline, Ortiz's phone buzzed. A contact at the Manhattan DA's office sent her a single line of text. Check the hospital. Malik Jefferson was in critical condition, but another inmate who'd eaten the same meal had vanished from the medical ward overnight, transferred, according to paperwork, to an undisclosed facility with no signature from a judge. The timing was too neat to ignore. Ortiz closed the notebook, her pulse quickening. Was she looking at gross negligence, or a deliberate pipeline of expired food and bribes reaching far beyond the kitchen? Who stood to profit, and who was willing to silence a witness? She stepped out into the yard, the smell of diesel and reheated starch in the air, knowing she had only hours before the press blew the story open. A siren wailed across the compound. Another unit was on lockdown, and in the commissary, a uniformed guard was quietly shredding a stack of invoices. Ortiz realized she was no longer investigating spoiled food. She was walking into a conspiracy that could shake the city's jail system to its core. The vanishing witness. The next morning, the New York Post splashed a grainy photo of Malik Jefferson across its front page. Rikers inmate critical after suspected food poisoning. The headline might as well have been a starting gun. Calls from City Hall, the DA's office, and advocacy groups flooded the Department of Correction before breakfast. But inside the island jail, silence and rumor spread faster than newsprint. Detective Lena Ortiz arrived at the infirmary to interview the second inmate, the one who had vanished overnight. His name was Ruben Rico Sandoval, a kitchen porter with a history of filing grievances. Nurses said he'd been there at midnight. By 2 a.m. he was gone. The transfer slip she found on the chart was typed but unsigned, bearing only a 3-digit code she'd never seen before. When she called the facility listed on the paperwork, a disembodied voice on the other end told her, "No such inmate in our system." She stepped outside, the icy wind cutting through her coat, and watched as a barge loaded with supply trucks churned across the East River. Inside the trucks, More food, more invoices, more secret. Her DA contact texted again, "Watch your back. Someone higher up is leaning on this." By midday, she was sitting in a cramped legal aid office in Queens, scanning dozens of handwritten affidavits from inmates. Each one painted the same picture: spoiled meat, moldy bread, disappearing complaints. One letter caught her eye. It was from Rico Sandoval himself, dated 3 weeks earlier. "They're using us as garbage disposals. Expired food comes in on the night barge. If you complain, you're on the next bus to nowhere." Below the signature, he'd scrawled 2 words in block capitals: blacklist. Ortiz took the letter to the city's contract procurement database. The company feeding Rikers, Eastern City Catering Services, had won its latest contract despite a string of sanitation violations and unpaid fines. Digging deeper, she found that the company's registered agent, a shell corporation in Delaware, had also contributed tens of thousands of dollars to a political action committee tied to a powerful city councilman who chaired the Correctional Oversight Committee. This wasn't just bad food. It was a network of money and influence built on the hunger of inmates no one wanted to hear from. That evening, Ortiz returned to Rikers with a subpoena. The kitchen supervisor she'd met before was gone, out sick, according to a guard who wouldn't meet her eyes. The freezers had been scrubbed spotless, and the black notebook she'd hidden under a pile of trays had disappeared. She walked through the echoing corridor of the main kitchen, past industrial sinks and empty racks, when she heard a door slam at the far end. Someone was still inside. She followed the sound into a narrow storage room lit only by a flickering bulb. There on the floor was a single manila envelope, sealed with brown tape, marked RS. Inside, a flash drive and a torn photo of Rico Sandoval in a hairnet, staring at the camera like he knew what was coming. Before she could process it, the light went out. The door clicked shut behind her. In the sudden darkness, she realized she wasn't alone. The flash drive. The first thing Detective Lena Ortiz felt was the metallic taste of fear. The storage room smelled of damp cardboard and old cooking oil. Somewhere above her, a vent rattled. She fumbled for her phone. Its screen cast a pale blue glow across the stacked crates. In her other hand, she clutched the manila envelope with the flash drive and photo inside. A soft scrape echoed behind a shelving unit. "Who's there?" she called, voice low but steady. No answer, only the steady hum of a refrigeration unit on the other side of the wall. She edged around the shelves, using her phone light like a weapon. The beam landed on a pair of boots disappearing through a maintenance hatch at floor level. The hatch slammed shut with a clang before she could reach it. Ortiz shoved against the door, but it was locked from the outside. She tried her radio. Dead air. Someone had jammed the signal. She backed up against the wall, breathing slowly. The flash drive felt heavy as a brick in her palm. Whoever had been in here wanted to make sure she didn't leave with it. Finally, she crouched, flipped open her phone's hotspot, and sent a single text to her DA contact. "Locked in kitchen storeroom. Flash drive." The message spun, then sent. She slid the drive into an evidence bag and tucked it inside her vest. Minutes crawled. Then a metallic click, the door unlocked. 2 uniformed officers stepped in. "Detective Ortiz," one said, "this area is off limits. You need to leave." She flashed her badge. "Then open an incident report right now." "Someone just locked me in." The men exchanged glances but wrote nothing. One muttered, "We'll escort you out." She saw their name tags and memorized them. They walked her to the exit without another word. Back in her car on the bridge, Ortiz jammed the flash drive into a laptop. The files were crude but explosive. Date-stamped photos of rotting meat, handwritten rosters of inmates assigned to kitchen duty, and dozens of PDF invoices with amounts circled in red. The last folder contained audio files, scratchy phone recordings of someone inside Eastern City Catering Services talking to a C.O. Torres about moving product before inspection days. She scrolled down. The final file was labeled Rico. She hit play. Rico Sandoval's voice crackled through the speakers. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone. They told me to shut up about the night barge shipments. There's more than expired food coming in. Check the boxes marked produce. Green light means don't inspect." Then silence, followed by a loud knock and muffled shouting. The recording ended abruptly. Ortiz leaned back, heart pounding. This wasn't just a scandal about bad meals. The jail kitchen might be a cover for a smuggling operation, or worse. And someone with power was prepared to disappear witnesses to protect it. She drove straight to the DA's office. Assistant District Attorney Colin Riley, a wiry man with a permanent frown, met her in a windowless conference room. She dropped the evidence bag on the table. "You need a warrant for every freezer and supply truck by tonight," she said. He clicked through the files, eyebrows rising. "If this is real, it's not just DOC. It's vendors, procurement, maybe City Hall." He looked up at her. "You realize what you've stepped into?" Ortiz did. She also knew she couldn't back out. She asked for a secure, safe house for Malik Jefferson's family. They'd already been threatened after speaking to reporters. Riley promised protection, but his voice lacked conviction. Later that night, she returned to her apartment in Astoria. On her kitchen counter sat a plain white box wrapped in butcher's paper. No return address. Inside was a single cafeteria tray. On it, a lump of gray meat loaf and a note, "Stay hungry, detective." She dropped the tray, grabbed her phone, but before she could dial, she heard movement on the fire escape. A shadow passed her window. She ducked, gun drawn, and crawled toward the door. The window rattled once more and then went still. She peered outside. Nothing but wet iron and city lights. Her phone buzzed, a new message from an unknown number. "You're next, Ortiz. We fed the city for years. We can feed you to the river." She sat back against the wall, adrenaline coursing. Someone had eyes on her apartment. Someone who knew she had the flash drive. She typed a quick reply to Riley. "Need surveillance now." But as she hit send, a news alert flashed across her screen. Kitchen supervisor at Rikers found dead in apparent suicide. The same supervisor who had whispered to her about the freezer. It was no longer an investigation. It was a countdown. The kitchen war. The morning after the white box appeared in her apartment, Detective Lena Ortiz didn't go to the precinct. She drove straight to the DA's secure evidence lab, her hair still damp from a rushed shower, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She handed the tray and note over to the tech team. "Dust everything. DNA, prints, anything," she ordered. The techs nodded, but she could tell from their faces that the message had spooked them too. Assistant DA Colin Riley was waiting for her with a fresh warrant packet. "Judge signed off on everything," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "Food deliveries, cold storage, vendor records, even the night barge manifest." He hesitated. "But the DOC commissioner is already on the phone with the mayor's office. They're nervous." Ortiz had no time for politics. She assembled a task force of trusted detectives and 2 inspectors from the state health department. That afternoon they rolled onto Rikers Island with cameras, gloves, and coolers for samples. Inmates in orange jumpsuits pressed their faces to the glass as the convoy passed. Inside the kitchen, tension was thick enough to taste. Corrections officers leaned on door frames, arms crossed. The new acting supervisor, a broad-shouldered man named Carter, flashed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Detective, I hear you're here to save the city from bad beans," he said. Ortiz ignored the jab and held up the warrant. "Step aside, please." They started with the freezers. The first 2 were spotless. The third, deeper in the back, told a different story. Boxes labeled produce held not only wilting vegetables but vacuum-sealed packages of contraband, tobacco, cell phones, and small foil packets of white powder. An inspector photographed everything. "This isn't negligence," he muttered. "This is a pipeline." In the office, Ortiz found a locked file cabinet. Carter protested, but the warrant gave her access. Inside were hard copies of internal memos. One was stamped "Confidential Internal Use Only" and described operational coordination with ECCS delivery personnel to minimize disruption during audits. Another memo listed a schedule of preferred inmate laborers with a column for incentive meals. At that moment, a shout erupted from the loading dock. Ortiz ran outside. One of her detectives had stopped a truck trying to leave early. The driver had no manifest, only a handwritten slip that read, "Return to vendor." Inside the truck were 40 crates of discarded food. The crates were nailed shut. When the inspectors pried one open, they found more contraband hidden under a thin layer of spoiled meat. News crews on the perimeter began filming. Helicopters circled overhead. Someone had leaked the raid. Ortiz's phone vibrated with a call from Riley. "We've got a problem," he said. "Our judge just rescinded the freezer warrant. Claimed procedural error. Somebody's pulling strings." She told him about the contraband. He swore under his breath. "Get whatever you can now. Chain of custody. We'll fight the rest later." Back inside, inmates whispered and pointed as Ortiz passed. One slipped her a folded scrap of paper as she walked by. She waited until she was alone to read it. In shaky handwriting it said, "Rico alive. OB4. Midnight. No signature." She didn't know what OB4 meant, but she had a guess. Observation Block 4, an old medical wing slated for closure. If Rico Sandoval was still on the island, that was where he'd be. That night, Ortiz went in without backup. The OB4 wing was dark, the air damp and cold. Rusted gurneys lined the hall. Her footsteps echoed. At the far end a door stood ajar, light spilling out. She edged closer, hand on her holster. Inside the room, a man sat slumped at a table, wrists cuffed. His face was gaunt, eyes darting. It was Rico Sandoval. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. "They're watching." "Who's watching?" Ortiz asked. Before he could answer, a loudspeaker crackled overhead. "Detective Ortiz, step away from the inmate." Metal doors clanged shut down the corridor. She drew her weapon. "We're leaving," she told Rico, unlocking his cuffs with a spare key. He stumbled to his feet. A shadow appeared at the end of the hall, 3 corrections officers in tactical vests, advancing slowly. "Put your weapon down," one ordered. "Inmate is in protective custody." Ortiz flashed her badge. "I'm taking him as a material witness." The men kept coming. Rico grabbed her arm. "There's more you don't know. The food's just the start. They're moving things on the night barge that..." He stopped as a dart hissed through the air. He collapsed, eyes rolling back. "Tranquilizer?" She didn't know. She fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The officers froze, then retreated into the shadows. She hoisted Rico over her shoulder, adrenaline spiking, and ran for the stairwell. The old medical wing had a side exit to the yard. She burst through it into the cold night. Searchlights swept the ground. An alarm blared. She ducked behind a dumpster, gasping. Across the yard, a boat's engine roared. The night barge was pulling away from the dock, stacked high with crates marked produce. She saw silhouettes on deck, one holding a radio. She dragged Rico toward her car, but tires screeched as a black van blocked the gate. Masked men jumped out, not in DOC uniforms. One aimed a flashlight at her, blinding her. "Give him to us," a voice commanded. She raised her gun. "Back off." For a moment everything froze, the alarms, the lights, the river beyond. Then a shot rang out, not from her gun. Glass shattered above her head. She grabbed Rico, dove under the fence, and rolled into the mud. The van doors slammed. The men retreated. The barge disappeared into the darkness. Ortiz crawled toward the bridge, dragging Rico behind her. He was conscious but barely. "It's bigger than food," he mumbled. "Bigger than Rikers." Then he passed out. Blue lights flashed on the far side of the bridge, Riley's car racing toward them. Ortiz waved frantically. "Get an ambulance," she shouted. As medics lifted Rico onto a stretcher, Ortiz stood on the asphalt, soaked and shaking, watching the river. Somewhere out there, the night barge carried crates of spoiled food, hiding something far more dangerous. And someone powerful enough to deploy black-masked men on a city island had just declared war on her investigation. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling, but not from cold. From the knowledge that the next move had to be hers, and one mistake could cost not only her case but her life. The night barge. Dawn bled slowly into the East River, a bruise-colored strip of light behind the Queensboro Bridge. Detective Lena Ortiz stood on the deck of an NYPD harbor unit cutter, the wind clawing at her jacket, the water black and restless beneath the hull. Beside her, Assistant DA Colin Riley gripped the rail, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the low, boxy silhouette slipping downriver ahead of them, the night barge. They had won the warrant at 4:12 a.m., after a judge who owed Riley a favor agreed to a pre-sunrise intercept to preserve perishable evidence. What the paperwork didn't say was that the evidence had learned how to hide in plain sight, beneath lettuce and gray meat loaf and sacks of flour that smelled faintly of chlorine. What it didn't say was that the people moving the evidence knew the river better than any judge. "Keep your distance until I say," the harbor unit sergeant called from the wheelhouse. His voice was calm, but the cutter's engine surged like a caged animal, eager to close. Spray snapped against the windshield. Ortiz tightened the strap on her vest and checked her radio. Behind them, another city boat trailed in the dawn haze, back up, thin and late. Riley leaned closer. "Once we board, we split. You take the forward hold. I'll take the manifest and the captain." He swallowed. "If they ditch anything overboard, we won't let them ditch," Ortiz said, though she wasn't sure. The barge was built for it. Low hatches, easy angles, a choreography practiced 100 times while the city slept. She thought of the crates she'd seen the night before, produce stamped across slats that hid contraband like a magician's false bottom. She thought of Rico Sandoval in the ambulance, whispering that this was bigger than food, bigger than Rikers, bigger than New York. A horn moaned somewhere in the fog. The cut of the barge grew clearer. Stacked pallets under tarps, a squat deckhouse near the stern, two figures in orange slickers standing sentry, silhouettes against the lightning sky. The harbor sergeant keyed his loud hailer. "City inspection. Heave to and prepare to be boarded." No response. One of the figures lifted a hand, not a wave, more like a calculation. The barge juddered, then throttled up, pushing a surge of wake that slapped their bow. The sergeant swore, gunned the engines, and swung wide to flank. The second city boat accelerated, angling for the far side. Ortiz's radio crackled. "We're making our approach," the sergeant said. "Detective, on my mark." She flexed her fingers. A deckhand loosed the grapple lines. Riley posed the warrant flat in a waterproof sleeve, as if paper could shield them from steel. The first impact was soft, a kiss of hulls, then a sudden grind as the barge tried to peel away. Hooks bit into rust. Deckhands hauled. Metal screamed against metal. The cutter lurched. "Board!" the sergeant shouted. Ortiz jumped, boots thudding onto cold steel. Riley came after, then two harbor officers in life vests with sidearms. The barge crew didn't run. They watched. The taller one in the orange slicker raised the visor of his rain hood and smiled like he recognized them. "Morning, detective." She didn't recognize him, but his eyes carried an old familiarity, the kind you developed with people who had once held a door or closed it on you. "We have a court order," she said. "Stand clear." He shrugged, a theatrical shiver. "Be my guest." Produce is perishable. Wouldn't want you to miss breakfast. Riley peeled off toward the wheelhouse with a harbor officer. Ortiz headed for the forward hatch. The deckhand who'd smiled reached for a rope cleat casually, as if tying off. She watched his hand. Something glittered in his palm, a small cylinder like a boat flare with a chemical cap. He palmed it against a seam and kept smiling. "Freeze," Ortiz said. He didn't. He tapped the cylinder once, twice. A hiss, a hot, acid whisper, bled into the morning. The seam beside the hatch frothed and sagged, metal crisping like paper under a match. Acid. She lunged, grabbed his wrist, twisted. He hissed, dropped the cylinder. It clattered, skittered, and rolled toward a scupper, leaking white smoke. The other crewman surged forward. A harbor officer intercepted him, shoulder-checking hard. Bodies slammed into rail. The river waited. "Forget the theatrics," Ortiz snapped, shoving the first man down, cuffing him to a stanchion. Her gloves burned faintly where the acid kissed the back. She ignored the sting and yanked the hatch. It stuck, then groaned open. Cold air rose, sharp with ammonia and old blood. A staircase dropped into a hold lined with crates. "Produce. Produce. Produce." She descended, the beam of her flashlight slicing fat shadows. Her breath plumed. She cracked the first crate. Lettuce, bruised and wet. The second, ham loaves sealed in plastic, slick as river stones. The third, a thin veneer of onions on top of false slats. She pried the slats with her knife. Beneath, vacuum-wrapped bricks the size of paperback books, unmarked. She pressed a seam, powder shifted inside like sand. The label on the pallet, "Fresh Greens," was a lie printed by a real vendor. A voice floated from above. Riley, shouting to the barge captain, "Where's your manifest?" The captain replied in a flat tone that carried boredom and contempt in equal parts. "No manifest. This is a return." Ortiz shoved her knife under another slat. Contraband phones. Cartons of cigarettes. Pouches of blister-packed pills stamped in Cyrillic and Spanish. Fentanyl test kits without manufacturer tags. In the last crate she found black nylon pouches labeled with 6-digit numbers. She unzipped one. Inside, laminated cards. Inmate IDs with real photos and false names. The edges were crisp. The holographic seals perfect. Her throat went dry. Smuggling in, smuggling out. False identities born in a freezer. Rico had been right. Bigger than food. Bigger than Rikers. Boots clanged on the ladder. A harbor officer dropped in, eyes wide. "Detective, on deck." He grabbed the crate edge for balance. "We've got a shadow." Fast boat. No lights. The hull trembled as something hard knocked against it. The officer lifted his radio. Static shrieked. Jamming. The hold felt suddenly smaller, the crates crowding in, secrets packed tight enough to suffocate. "Get samples, everything we can move," Ortiz said, already reaching for evidence bags. "Photograph. Time stamp." The officer snapped photos, hands shaking. A thud above, heavier now. Voices rose, then the high, mean bark of a small engine revving close. Ortiz grabbed 2 of the laminated ID pouches, a brick from the first false bottom crate, and snapped a dozen photos in quick succession. She could feel the timeline tightening, the window shrinking to a slit. The ladder rattled. Riley slid down, breathless. "Wheelhouse lost comms," he said, holding up a handful of papers. "Captain's got a clipboard of nothing. All the lines are code." He caught sight of the open crates and went pale. "Jesus. Get it in a bag," she said. He did, fumbling for a seal. The hull shuddered again. Water hissed against steel. Something scraped along the port side with a purposeful, cutting sound like a saw set to low. "Cutters," Ortiz breathed. "They're trying to open a vent." Shouts above. The bark of engines. 2 quick, flat pops. Not the bass of pistols, the metallic cough of launchers. A crunch as something clamped to the rail. Grapnels. The sound of bodies. The hold vibrated with the sound of a brief, desperate fight. "Move," Ortiz said. She slung the evidence bag over her shoulder, shoved the brick and the IDs inside a second pouch, and boosted up the ladder. Morning had brightened to a pewter wash. The fast boat had come alongside, a low, black shadow with a raked prow and men in matte helmets crouched at the bow. The harbor unit cutter was trying to peel the intruder off with wake, but the fast boat was glued to the barge like a remora. One of the matte-helmeted men had a bolt cutter clamped on the chain of their boarding hook. He snapped it, and their city boat slewed away, almost losing a deckhand to the rail. "Stop!" Ortiz shouted, leveling her weapon. One of the masked men pivoted and lifted a tube. A flash, smoke, her ears rang with a concussive pop. A flare smashed into the deck where she'd been standing, spitting white fire. Heat rolled over her. She stumbled, eyes watering, dragged herself to the bulkhead, and fired 2 shots above the intruder's bow. He ducked, cool as a dock worker. The black boat surged, and 2 men vaulted onto the barge like cats. Close quarters stole the finesse from everything. The deck turned into a tangle of elbows, boots, and grunts. A harbor officer took one masked man low and they skidded along the plates, smashing into a coil of lines. Riley swung a baton clumsily, connected with a shoulder, then was thrown into the wheelhouse door, gasping. Ortiz kept moving, stayed low, and felt the barge pitch. The captain had cut throttle and yanked hard to starboard, turning the fight into a carnival ride. Crates shifted. Tarps peeled back. Another masked man slipped and went to a knee near the forward hatch. For a heartbeat, Ortiz saw what he carried. A hard case the size of a lunchbox, stenciled with letters she only partly read before he snapped it shut and swung it toward the rail. She lunged. He dropped the case into the river. She fired, one clean shot, catching the edge of his vest and spinning him into the rail. He recovered with unnerving speed and rolled, disappearing behind a stack of pallet. The case bobbed once in the black water, then flipped and sank with obscene elegance. Evidence gone, maybe the records, maybe the money run, maybe something else she hadn't yet imagined. The river swallowed it all the same. "Ortiz!" Riley's voice cracked from somewhere behind a haze of smoke. She turned. A masked man had Riley by the collar, dragging him toward the bow rail. She sprinted, slammed her shoulder into the assailant's ribs, felt bone under armor, heard air leave lungs. They went down in a messy tangle. She scrambled, wrenched the man's arm back until something popped. He hissed, tried to twist a blade from a wrist sheath. She trapped the knife hand under her knee and hammered his forearm against the deck until the blade skittered away. Riley coughed, eyes streaming. "They've got more on the port side," he wheezed. "We're outnumbered." "Not for long," the harbor sergeant shouted from the cutter, which had muscled back into position. A heavy stream from a fire monitor blasted across the barge's deck, bowling one intruder into the scuppers and hosing the flare into a sizzling hiss. The fast boat bucked on the opposite side, struggling against the spray. From the corner of her eye, Ortiz caught motion at the stern, the barge captain ducking into the deckhouse with a satchel hugged to his chest. She sprinted after him, skidding on the wet steel, and shouldered through the deckhouse door. Inside, a cramped cockpit, a smell of diesel and stale coffee, a wall of gauges scabbed with duct tape. The captain spun, eyes flat. He reached for a lever. She leveled her gun. "Don't," she said. He smiled without warmth and let go of the lever. His free hand, the one that had been behind his leg, came up holding a flare gun. He fired point blank into the ceiling. Phosphor splashed across the cabin in a bouquet of angry stars. Heat roared. Smoke bit her throat. She coughed, fired once, catching the flare pistol and sending it clattering under the console. The captain lunged. They crashed against the chart table. A drawer flew open. Paper and plastic map sleeves scattered like fish. Her hand found his wrist. She levered him forward, slammed him face first into the bulkhead, and cuffed him with one loop. Then the other loop snapped shut around a grab bar. He spat blood and laughed. "You think you've got it, detective? You've got lettuce." She reached into the open drawer, grabbed the nearest bundle of papers, and stuffed them into her jacket. Flames licked the ceiling. She backed out, dragging the captain just enough to keep him from bolting, then left him cuffed to the rail outside, where the spray from the fire monitor kept the deck too slick for heroics. The fast boat made one last, mean surge, bumping the barge hard. Then it peeled away, skimming the surface, vanishing into the brightening haze toward a waiting tug that had been loitering north of Ward's Island. On the barge, 2 masked men lay zip-tied and coughing, the third overboard and hauled by a boat hook to the city cutter. The harbor unit crew worked like a bucket brigade, dousing hot spots where the flare had chewed into paint. Ortiz stood in the wrecked deckhouse doorway, chest heaving, smoke tracing her hair, and looked down at the bundle she'd grabbed. Not maps. Ledger sheets, printed columns of numbers formatted like invoices, except the vendor names were nonsense. Harford Greens, Island Orchard, Morningside Farms. Columns labeled units, weight, and color. The color column was wrong for produce: white, blue, black. Code. And at the top of each sheet, a stamp. ECCS disbursement with a small, precise initials block. Initials she recognized from the hidden notebook in the Rikers kitchen. Riley stumbled up beside her, face streaked. "You alive?" he rasped. "Barely," she said. He lifted a sealed bag with the contraband brick she'd pulled from the hold. "We've got enough to lock someone. Maybe many someones. Someone tried to make sure we didn't," she said, scanning the river. The fast boat was gone. Sirens wailed on shore. Helicopters carved the air. On the far bank, a plume of smoke rose from under the Triborough, no, from a truck idling near a pier, a truck with a refrigeration unit bolted to the back and the words "Island Produce Recovery" stenciled in green. It pulled away smoothly, merging with early traffic, its driver never looking at the water. Her radio sputtered back to life through a veil of static. "Unit 3, this is Central. Coast Guard inbound. FDNY Marine inbound. NYPD Air 1 inbound. Confirm status, boarding complete." The harbor sergeant answered, voice hoarse. "Boarding complete. Multiple detainees. Shots fired. Evidence secured. Fire contained. Copy." A beat of silence. Then, "Be advised, Central has a sealed message for ADA Riley, priority from City Hall. When secure, contact command." Riley's expression tightened. He looked down at the ledger sheets in Ortiz's hand, then at the hard case rings drying on the deck where something important had gone to the bottom. He nodded toward the papers. "You think those initials belong to who I think they belong to?" She pictured the committee dais, the camera lights, the city councilman with the smooth tie who chaired oversight and raised money from vendors, the smile that never reached his eyes. She pictured the commissioner whose signature had appeared on the memo that coordinated with ECCS during audits, and the deputy with the unlisted phone. She pictured the long line of invisible hands that could jam radios, rescind warrants at dawn, and dispatch a black boat with a lunchbox full of something that needed the river more than a courtroom. "Yes," she said. "And if City Hall is calling before the Coast Guard ties off, they already know we have it." He swallowed. "They'll try to get ahead of it. They'll offer us a scapegoat and a press conference." "They can have their press conference," she said, folding the ledgers into a dry evidence bag and sealing it with a slap. "I want the chain." A shout from the bow. A deckhand leaned over, gaffing a plastic sleeve bobbing near the hull, a packet of cards that had tried to get away and failed. He snagged it and handed it up to Ortiz. She peeled it open carefully. Water poured out. Inside lay a single laminated ID that hadn't escaped the current. The face stared up at her, A woman in a hairnet and whites, mid-40s, eyes fierce even in a badge photo. Kitchen, K. Serrano. Not an inmate. Staff. Her stomach turned. She flipped the card. On the back, a smear of ink where a number had bled, the 6-digit code she'd seen on the nylon pouches. Not random. Catalog. Track. The pipeline had personnel files attached. Who's Serrano? Riley asked. Maybe our whistleblower cook, Ortiz said softly. Maybe the next body. The river hissed, the barge ticked as it cooled, and the city woke fully around them, indifferent and enormous. The harbor unit crew worked the deck with professional silence. FDNY Marine's horn sounded from the south. Riley's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and blanched. Command, he said. They want us to hold on charging. Coordination meeting, at 11. Ortiz stared at him until he looked away. We don't hold, she said. We book what's on this deck, we secure the ledgers, we log the brick, and we put those 2 masked clowns in a room where a federal microphone can hear them breathe. She turned the sealed bag in her hands, watching the ledger's water beating on the plastic. And then we go find Serrano. He nodded, but his eyes were elsewhere, on the city line where politics met patrol boats, where truth came wrapped in stamped paper and died in committee. The harbor sergeant stepped close. Detective, he said quietly, diverse are en route. We can try for whatever went overboard. She shook her head. You'll find a case. It'll be empty. You sound sure. She was. Whoever had sent that black boat didn't toss things into the river unprepared. There would be ballast, a timer, a crumbling core that ate paper like acid ate steel. A theater of water to erase the arithmetic of crime. She looked down at the single salvaged ID card in her hand, the face of K. Serrano staring up like a dare. Somewhere between a jail kitchen and a city contract office, a network had learned to turn hunger into product. Somewhere between a ledger and a boat, men had learned to make evidence sink. Ortiz closed her fist around the bag until the plastic creaked. They didn't sink everything, she said. Not this time. Behind them, the city hall skyline caught the day's first clean light, glass and stone shining the way a blade flashes when you bare it. The radio hissed. Unit 3, Central said, as if asking a casual question. Confirm you will proceed to Pier 101 for debrief with command. Riley met her eyes. Wind tugged the corners of the warrant sleeve against his chest. Pier 101, he said slowly. That's City Hall's Marine Pier. Ortiz looked back at the black line where the fast boat had vanished and then down at the ledgers, the brick, the ID card that had written its own rescue. No, she said, voice even. We proceed to 1 Police Plaza. Evidence, booking, and we call the feds from my phone. She expected pushback. The radio only crackled. The harbor sergeant's mouth twitched, something like approval surfacing under the ash. Detective, he said. 1 pages. The cutter eased the barge toward the shadow of the bridge, cables humming, city drawing them in. Ortiz tucked the salvaged badge into the pocket nearest her heart and stared into the wind, the taste of salt and smoke in her mouth, the ledger's edges cutting like a promise through the plastic. Somewhere ahead, a woman named Serrano was either waiting to talk or running for her life. And somewhere behind, a case lay on the riverbed, empty as a statement at a press conference. The day was just beginning. The kitchen war was far from over. The last meal. The fluorescent lights of 1 Police Plaza hummed like hornet. Detective Lena Ortiz sat in a windowless interview room with a paper cup of cold coffee and the salvaged badge of K. Serrano on the table between her hands. Rico Sandoval was under federal protective custody now. A pair of U.S. Marshals had whisked him out of Bellevue an hour ago. The ledgers, the contraband samples, the photos, all logged, sealed, and handed to an FBI evidence team waiting in the garage. On paper, it was the biggest clean handoff of her career. On paper. Outside the room a war was brewing. City Hall had gone into crisis mode the moment the barge was intercepted. The commissioner's office denied any wrongdoing, called the raid an unfortunate misunderstanding, and promised full cooperation. Eastern City Catering Services issued a statement saying it categorically rejected any allegations of contraband or expired food and blamed rogue employees. Meanwhile, anonymous threats poured into the DA's office. One aide found a dead pigeon on her doorstep with a note in its beak. "Hunger is a business." Ortiz's phone vibrated. A secure text from ADA Riley. "Serrano wants to meet." Staten Island Ferry Terminal. Noon. Her pulse quickened. She had spent the morning piecing through ECCS invoices and the hidden notebook she'd copied before it vanished. All the initials lined up with one name, K. Serrano, kitchen line cook turned whistleblower. If Serrano was still alive, she could tie everything together. The food, the smuggling, the fake IDs, the politicians. Ortiz slipped out a side exit, badge tucked away, coat collar high. At the ferry terminal, gulls screamed above steel pylons. Commuters in heavy coats streamed past without looking. Serrano waited at the edge of the dock, a scarf wrapped tight, eyes scanning the crowd. She was older than the badge photo but unmistakable. Ortiz approached slowly. "You don't know how many people want me dead," Serrano said without greeting. "I've been hiding in shelters. They found my nephew in the Bronx and beat him. He's 16. Her voice shook, but her gaze was steady. "I'll talk. But you have to promise witness protection." "You have my word," Ortiz said. "Federal protection. Not city." Serrano handed her a flash drive wrapped in wax paper. "Menus, shipments, payroll, everything. It's not just contraband. They're billing the city for meals they never deliver, and feeding inmates garbage from the night barge. Millions laundered through shell companies. And when the city audits, ECCS pays off the inspectors. Your friend in the council gets his cut." "Why come to me?" Ortiz asked quietly. "Because you're the only one who didn't look away," Serrano said. "But they know about this meeting." Ortiz's skin prickled. "We have to move now." A ferry horn bellowed. The crowd shifted. Out of the corner of her eye, Ortiz saw two men in work jackets moving against the flow. One reached under his coat. She pulled Serrano toward the gangway. "Go," she hissed. Gunmetal flashed. A shot cracked, echoing off steel. Screams erupted. Ortiz drew her weapon and fired once in warning, scattering pigeons. The two men melted into the throng, their job done. A warning, not a hit. A ferry guard radioed for help. Sirens wailed in the distance. Ortiz hustled Serrano into a maintenance corridor. U.S. Marshals will meet us 3 blocks away, she said, heart hammering. "Keep your head down." They emerged into daylight on the far side of the terminal just as a black SUV sped past, tinted windows up. Inside, a man in a councilman's lapel pin stared at her, expression unreadable. The SUV vanished into traffic. By mid-afternoon, Serrano was in a federal safehouse with Rico. Ortiz and Riley sat in a cramped FBI conference room as agents scrolled through the new flash drive's contents. Doctored invoices, secret meal skip schedules, bank transfers to offshore accounts. A single spreadsheet showed ECCS paying a PAC linked to the Oversight Committee chair. It was everything they'd suspected and more. But even as the agents whispered and the printer spat out evidence labels, Ortiz felt a hollow chill. The barge's hard case had gone to the river bottom. The masked men had walked free. City Hall's press office was already spinning isolated bad actors and procurement reform. And she'd just painted a target on her own back. That night, a public hearing convened in an emergency session. Riley presented the ledgers. Ortiz described the contraband hidden in produce crate. Serrano testified remotely, voice trembling but clear. Cameras rolled. Viewers across the city watched in shock as the kitchen scandal cracked open live. The commissioner resigned mid-hearing. ECCS's contract was suspended. Federal indictments were announced before midnight. It looked like victory. Afterwards, Ortiz walked alone down Center Street, neon reflected in wet asphalt. The wind off the river smelled of salt and diesel. She knew better than to mistake an indictment for justice. Someone had financed the black boat. Someone had ordered the hard case into the river. Someone would rebuild the pipeline under a new name. At her apartment door she found another plain white box, smaller this time. Inside, a single cafeteria spoon and a note in neat block letters. The kitchen closes when we say, "See you at the next meal." She stared at it for a long time, then dropped it into an evidence bag. Through the window the skyline glittered like a blade. In her pocket her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number with a photo of a prison kitchen she didn't recognize, stainless steel gleaming, crates stacked high. The caption read, "Georgia. Same vendor." Ortiz closed her eyes, exhaled, and slid the phone into her coat. "If you thought Rikers was bad," she murmured to no one, "wait until you see what's hidden in the next kitchen." The camera would fade out on her face, but the story wouldn't be over. Not even close. Epilogue. The kitchen never closes. Winter light slanted across the East River as Detective Lena Ortiz stood on the pedestrian span of the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge, coat zipped high, hands in her pocket. Below her the same currents that had swallowed the barge's hard case churned a dull green. A Coast Guard buoy marked the spot where divers had searched for days and found nothing but a few splintered slats stamped "Produced." In the weeks since the public hearing, indictments had rolled like dominoes. Eastern City Catering Services executives were perp-walked in front of cameras. The commissioner took a quiet plea. The councilman who chaired oversight resigned citing health reasons. Federal agents raided warehouses in Queens and Newark, seizing pallets of spoiled food mixed with contraband. Headlines screamed Rikers food scandal exposed. Social media buzzed with hashtags. To the public, it looked like a clean win. Ortiz knew better. She still had the salvaged badge of K. Serrano and a folder of sealed documents under her arm. Serrano and Rico were safe for now in a federal witness program. But anonymous texts still arrived on her burner phone, photos of her building, a child's drawing of a cafeteria tray, a knife emoji. Each one a quiet reminder that the network she'd exposed wasn't dead, only retreating. A gust of wind rattled the bridge's steel. She remembered Serrano's words at the ferry terminal. "They're billing the city for meals they never deliver." She remembered the masked men on the barge, trained, disciplined, not just hired thugs. Someone with reach had built a pipeline that began with inmate hunger and ended with offshore account. Someone still free. Her phone buzzed. A new message, no number. Just a GPS pin dropped in Georgia, near a medium-security prison kitchen with a brand-new food contract. The caption, "Different state. Same vendor." She stared at the screen until her fingers went numb. Then she opened her notebook and wrote one line beneath the last entry. "The kitchen never closes." Below on the river, a barge horn echoed. She imagined crates sliding under a false deck, invoices with color codes, sealed hard cases slipping into deep water. She imagined the next whistleblower, the next ledger, the next night barge. When she turned to go, the skyline caught the fading light, glass and stone burning orange like the flare that had scorched the barge deck. Behind her the wind carried gull cries and sirens. Ahead of her lay another city, another kitchen, another fight. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just walked, the badge of K. Serrano pressed to her palm, and thought about the next meal the public would never see, and the next story she would have to tell. The Hunger Network. Snow fell in heavy flakes over lower Manhattan, whitening the streets and muffling the sirens. Detective Lena Ortiz moved quickly, her breath a visible cloud in the frigid air. In one gloved hand she held a sealed laptop bag containing the last of K. Serrano's documents. In the other, she gripped a thermos of burnt coffee, untouched. Today wasn't about caffeine. Today was about ending a story before it rewrote itself. It had been 3 months since the night barge raid. The city's headlines had moved on to new scandals, but Ortiz's case file kept expanding. Every lead she pulled unraveled into another state contract, another shell company, another produce shipment with a color code. What had started as a spoiled food complaint at Rikers had metastasized into a network spanning 5 states, dozens of facilities, and millions of taxpayer dollars. Even the feds admitted privately they were outgunned on paper. And now she had one last card to play, a live appearance on a late-night investigative show where she would reveal, with Serrano's blessing, the full scope of the scheme, names, numbers, and photographs. It was a desperate move. The network would hate her for it. But she knew public daylight was the only thing strong enough to burn away the shadows. She crossed Foley Square to a nondescript building with blacked-out windows. Inside, the studio buzzed with technicians, cameras, and whispered rehearsal note. The host, a grizzled journalist with a reputation for eating corrupt officials for breakfast, greeted her with a firm handshake. "Ready to blow the kitchen doors off?" he asked. She nodded. "Just roll it as is. No edits." They wired her up, counted down from 10, and went live. The host opened with a montage. Roaches on trays, boxes of contraband under wilted lettuce, sound bites from the hearing. Then he turned to Ortiz. "Detective, viewers think this scandal ended with the barge. What's the truth?" She looked straight into the camera. "The truth is the barge was just one boat on a river that runs through the whole corrections system. What we uncovered at Rikers wasn't a local mistake. It was a business model. It's still operating. And it's feeding on taxpayer money and inmate hunger right now in Georgia, Texas, Illinois." As she spoke, producers rolled Serrano's files on screen. Doctored invoices, color-coded shipment lists, wire transfers to offshore accounts. The host's jaw tightened. "And you're saying city officials knew?" "I'm saying they couldn't not know," Ortiz replied. "The contracts were rigged. The audits were fake. Even the ID cards we found on the barge, those were being used to cycle phantom inmates through the kitchen labor pool to pad bills and smuggle contraband. Food was just the cover." A silence fell across the studio. Then the host said, "You've made powerful enemies. They already tried to kill a witness," she said evenly. "If anything happens to me or K. Serrano, these documents go public in full. This isn't about me. It's about the people locked up and fed garbage while someone else got rich." The segment went viral before she left the building. Within hours, #HungerNetwork trended on Twitter. Cable news replayed clips on loop. Anonymous sources leaked that federal grand juries were being convened. By dawn, the backlash began. City Hall denounced her as a grandstanding detective. ECCS filed a defamation suit. A union spokesperson accused her of endangering correctional staff. Ortiz didn't flinch. She spent the day moving Serrano to a new safe location under Marshall's guard and triple-checking her own apartment for bugs. That night she sat alone at her kitchen table, still in her coat, snow melting in her hair. Her phone buzzed with a new message, a single photograph. It showed a stainless steel kitchen in a southern prison she didn't recognize. Crates stacked to the ceiling. On the nearest crate, stamped in bright green letters, 2 words, "Last meal." Her heart thudded once hard. She zoomed in. The crate bore the same color-coded sticker system from Serrano's files, white, blue, black, but now a new color glared up at her, red. Before she could forward the photo, a knock came at her door, soft, deliberate. She stood, hand on her gun. "Who is it?" A voice she recognized. "Rico Sandoval. They moved me again. I had to see you." She opened the door. He looked thinner, older, eyes darting. "You can't stop them," he whispered. "They're changing vendors, changing names. They've got new routes. The crates aren't just hiding phones anymore. They're hiding people. What do you mean? She asked sharply. They're cycling undocumented workers and fugitives through fake kitchen jobs. No fingerprints, no records. Ship them out disguised as produce. The food is just the wrapper. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a thumb drive. Everything I couldn't say on TV, he murmured. If I disappear, give it to the press. She nodded, but before she could ask another question, headlights flared in the street below. A black SUV idled at the curb, exhaust pluming in the cold. Its windows were black mirrors. No plates. Rico stiffened. They found me. Ortiz grabbed her coat. We're leaving by the fire escape. They moved quickly, descending into the alley behind her building. Snow muffled their step. But when they reached the corner, another SUV blocked the exit. Two men stepped out, faces hidden by scarves. Detective Ortiz, one called softly. We just want the drive. She shoved Rico behind her, drew her gun. Back up. You go public with that drive, you'll bring down things you don't understand, the man said. You think the kitchen ends at Rikers? It feeds an army. I'm done being hungry, she said. Then everything happened at once. A flash of light, a stun grenade, turned the alley into white noise. Rico dropped. She fired blind, hit metal. The men retreated into the snow, vanishing like ghosts. Sirens wailed somewhere near. When her vision cleared, the SUVs were gone. Only tire tracks and exhaust hung in the freezing air. Rico stirred, dazed but alive. They won't stop, he muttered. They can't. Too much money. Too many mouths. Ortiz tucked the thumb drive into her inner pocket. Then we keep feeding them evidence, she said grimly. She called her marshal's contact, voice steady. We need an extraction now. An unmarked van arrived within minutes. Marshals hustled Rico inside. Ortiz climbed in after him, looking once more at the empty street. The snow had already begun to fill the tire tracks, erasing the night's footprints. As the van pulled away, her phone buzzed again, another photo from the unknown sender. This time it was a close-up of a cafeteria tray, empty except for a single spoon bent into the shape of a hook. The caption read, "Next course, you." Ortiz stared at the screen, then powered the phone off. She leaned back against the seat, eyes closing, and thought of the first time she'd walked into the Rikers kitchen, thinking it was just another complaint. She thought of Malik Jefferson, still recovering. Of Kay Serrano's nephew. Of the ledger's initials and the crates that floated on rivers across America. Somewhere a new barge was loading. Somewhere another kitchen was opening. She could feel the network like a living thing under the nation's surface, arteries of contraband and false invoices and human bodies disguised as food. But she also felt something else, the weight of the thumb drive in her pocket, warm from her body heat, like a fuse waiting to be lit. She looked out the van's frosted window at the city skyline, glittering like a knife. If you thought the kitchen was closed, she whispered, think again. Then she turned to the marshals. Get me to the bureau. We're going nationwide. The van merged onto the highway, taillights disappearing into snow. Somewhere out there the hunger network still fed. But somewhere in here the first real counterstrike had begun. Fade to black. A single line of text appears on screen. The kitchen never closes.